You don't see the river at first. You hear it, the kind of low, unbroken rumble that lives under other noises. Lanterns knocking against coat buttons, shovel blades biting mud, men breathing through their mouths because the air tastes of damp burlap and creosote. Floodlights turn the night colorless along the levee north of Greenville, Mississippi. It's April 1927, and the Mississippi has been swollen to long since the autumn storms of '26. And every rain after, the basin's soaked like a sponge that can't take one more drop. The river has learned to carry trees whole. It has learned to carry barns. Sharecroppers and rivermen with their boots sunk. Ankle-deep stand where river becomes bank, and bank becomes an argument. The levee is the argument on earth and wool, packed by generations who believed, because they were taught, that dirt in the right shape could order water. Sand boil, a weathered man says, and Neil, not far off. The river whispers through the ground itself, surfacing in a clear, treacherous bubble that wells up on the landside. They throw sacks, thousands of them, into that small, polite fountain. Because they have been told to. Because this is what you do to keep the ground from becoming a door. A boy carries coffee along the crown of the levee, steam lifting into a night that can't decide if it's spring. The line of men is broken up by soldiers, Mississippi, National Guard in broad-brimmed hats, rifles slung, planters in overcoats, black laborers dragged from fields by obligation that doesn't bother to call itself anything more polite. The command passes along like current. Keep filling. Keep tamping. Keep stamping the water out of the earth. A whistle shrills from the barge moored to flood-swollen willows below. A tired sound. Part warning, part reminder that people still make noises when the world grows loud. Downriver, a woman named Lila wraps quilts around two sleeping children on a wagon standing on the dirt road that crowns the levee. Her husband, Isaiah, has been out on the floodwall for hours, his shovel a metronome that keeps other men honest. They say it'll crest by morning. Someone had said at noon. They said that yesterday, someone else had answered. The Weather Bureau in Memphis has passed, telegraphed warnings for days numbers that meant something to men with notebooks. Crest heights, feet above stage. A calculus of danger that the river solves with the back of its hand. A telegraph clicks in the levee camp office like a trapped beetle. At the Mississippi River Commission, Colonel Edgar Jadwin's plans are papers on table spillways sketched in hard pencil. The alternative to an old religion called levees. The river has no interest in policy arguments tonight. It presses with the body of everything north of here. On the wet, black water below, a towboat shoulders, drift holes, sycamores. A chicken coop spinning like a toy in bathwater. Somebody's roof edged second, only to the current. The pilot is tied off to the willows and watches the lamps creep along the mud-brown parapet above. A procession. He listens, too, to the very particular sound of a levee under pressure. The low animal groan as if something buried is turning over in sleep. At Mounds Landing, where the levee meets the river in a long, straight reach that was supposed to be the strength of it, everything hardens into minutes. The sand boils multiply. Somebody points a lantern and sees the river's hand inside the soil. More sacks is shouted, and men make a chain, the smallest ones running, the oldest ones anchoring the ends. The sacks go in. They sink. They do not come back. The water takes. The water is always hiring. A wagon skids and nearly tips. A soldier swears. The boy with coffee stumbles and rights the pot and burns a thumb and doesn't feel it because the fear carries everything else. Lila tightens her quilts and looks north toward the murmur that is not wind, and murmurs back to her children, a song without a tune. From somewhere back toward town, a whistle blows 3 long blasts. It is a signal, beautiful in its cruelty. This is bigger than you. Isaiah looks up from his trench and sees the floodlights. Beam slant wrong. Giggle. Strobe. As if the world is yawning. The sound changes. It's still the river, but the timbre is higher, thinner, a violin string coming up, toward a note no one asked for. A crack runs along the levee's crown like a zipper pulled too fast. A light falls. A man shouts a word that becomes other men's words as the crack becomes a seam and the seam becomes a line you can step across. The earth breathes in water. For a second it looks like it might be a small collapse, a manageable bite out of the miles of brown wall that stand between this river and every house light in the dark. For a second, it lets someone believe that a leak is a leak. The river, given the slightest geometry, remembers it is a knife. The breach 30 feet across becomes 60, as if it is practicing replication. Isaiah drops his shovel and runs toward the shouting, to pull somebody out of the way of the slumping earth. He pulls only air as the slope turns fluid, and the sacks he stacked this afternoon slide into the mouth like bread down a throat. The labor of weeks goes soft. The water pours, not in a sheet, but in an animal thrust, through and over, tearing the breach wider, and the levee does what even the best walls do someday. It stops, pretending it is a thing separate from Mother Earth. Leela hears it, the way a mother hears a child wake in a bad dreama. Change in tone she cannot ignore. In the beam of a lantern that is suddenly too small, the dark edge where river had been river leaps into where wagon had been road. The first houses, on the low side of the levee below Mounds Landing, wink out. Then surface, roofs slick with the same greasy sheen that coats the pilings of docks. The willow trunks that seem to be planted in forevers loosen and drift. On the crown of the levee, men and boys and soldiers become silhouettes, running east toward Greenville because running west would be toward water. Isaiah reaches the wagon. Go, he says. There isn't room for a goodbye. The mule lunges at the lash and Lila clamps both hands on the seat board, and the quilts tighten around round sleeping bodies, who awaken to a geography they won't recognize. The road on the levee is a spine under them as the river comes through the ribs. In the first minute, the breach is a mouth. In the second, it is a gate. In the third, the Mississippi walks into the delta and does not intend to leave politely. The river arrives, carrying whole stories. Doors still hinge 2 frames. A piano that turns once and sticks its keys into a sycamore. Bales of cotton that drank until they couldn't, then broke their straps and floated like white haystacks. Lanterns swing, red sparks, arcing out and dying on black water that instantly his shoulders. Waves inside it where there were fields. Waves where there were corn rows like Braille, the river reads with the flat of its hand. North of Greenville, the break at Mounds Landing releases the Mississippi as a sheeted animal. It runs down the long slope of the delta, the flattest, richest country for 100 miles, and fills it. Where the levee curved, it doesn't curve now. Where the river had been taught to stay in its bed, it has climbed out and is learning rooms. Farmhouses become rafts or anchors, depending on how well they were pinned to the earth. Men cut holes in roofs. Women push children up through them, feet kicking, and then follow, their skirts heavy with the river they are trying to escape. Chickens roost on ridge lines in the rain. Hogs swim badly. In a few minutes, fences are history. In an hour, roads are guesses. Greenville is a strip of high ground in a leviath, and plank and faith it suddenly becomes the only place to stand for miles. People pour down Washington Avenue toward the riverfront, toward the crown, because up is up, even if up is narrow and crowded. The town's lights go in a pucker as the substations drown. The last electric moments are like an old movie, frames blinking faster and then black. The steamboat wharf, where every day used to be a list and a schedule, is a platform for luck. Pilots who had idled along this bank for a dozen seasons throttle up and swing into the new, frictionless city that is the floodplain. On the levee, Isaiah's wagon stops when the tight pack of boadies and animals makes forward motion into a negotiation. Lila holds one child under each arm now, not because it is practical, but because her body insists. The quilts are already soaked. Hold on, she says. To them, to the levee, to the idea of levee. She does not look back, because everything behind the crown is motion. A mile away, Will Persaitha, planter's son, poet, lawyer. The man who wears responsibility like a shirt that doesn't fit stands on the parapet and watches his hometown become an island. He will be part of the relief committee here. In days he will fight the knowledge that people are being held on the levee against their will. Black men not allowed to board rescue boats because the delta will need their labor after the water leaves. Tonight, that morality is still a minute away. The first order is boats. The second is bread. The third will be order. And order has barbs. Downriver, in a clapboard house with cedar shingles near the Sunflower River, a man named Josiah climbs the stairs to the attic and then through the attic window onto the roof, a handsaw between his teeth. He had waited until the last minute because waiting is a kind of belief. Now, as the flood climbs the walls, in the parlor below, like an ivy that learned to run, he knows waiting is over. He saws. When the saw binds, he pries with his own shoulder. When the square lifts, the sky is low and fast. The stars, not stars, but the tips of rain pinning the night down. He lifts his wife through the hole. She lifts the baby. The baby hits the roof boards with a bounce and opens his mouth to practice breathing air that tastes of Mississippi. They all lie flat, hold on, and ride their own roof like a raft. Telegraph keys chatter at Greenville. At Memphis, levee has given way at Mounds Landing. Stop orders spreading fast. Stop, send boats. Men, food, medicine, stop. The Weather Bureau's river bulletins are black ink on white paper that nobody on a roof will read. The figures will be historic. 27,000 square miles inundated before the summer's over. An area bigger than a state on maps children will color in school. Hundreds of thousands displaced black sharecroppers, white smallholders. Townspeople alike bringing the small economies of their lives in pillowcases and rolled quilts and coffee cans with lids soldered on. Across the delta, the big houses on slight rizzes become arcs, white porches crowded with neighbors and strangers. The social grammar rewritten by the immediate logic of dry floorboards. In the gumbo fields, water runs fast enough to cut new sloughs in a day. Cypress knees that had been earth art become hazards. Cotton rows lie down like hair. The backwater climbs into trees whose leaves are barely minted for spring. The first Red Cross tents bloom in Memphis like a strange, useful crop. Herbert Hoover, Secretary of Commerce, begins gathering power into his hands by telegram the Red Cross, nominally in charge of relief. But Hoover's coordination as the center of a web. He speaks a language the press can print, and the press is hungry. This is the greatest peacetime calamity in our history, he will say, and the sentence will be a net in which he catches a campaign. On tea ground, the Red Cross, boxcars, are more immediate than rhetoric. Canvas, flour, salt, quinine, coffee, blankets, somewhere a doctor with a stethoscope and a half bag of morphine. The Greenville levee turns into a refugee camp as fast as canvas can be unfolded and poles can be pushed into soil that pretends to be firm. There are lines because lines are how people remember they are people. There is coffee that is weak and hot. There is bread that has been cut into smaller pieces and then smaller again. There is a system. Systems have edges. The edge here is skin. Black families are ordered to one side, white families to another. Black hands that filled sandbags are sent back down the levee to fill more, to work on the very wall they are not allowed to leave, so there will be labor when the water pulls back. Guards with rifles make sure the boats take the right bodies. Every injustice has paperwork. Here, it also has boats from the Gulfward end of the river. A rumor blows upstream. New Orleans will be dynamited levees, cut below the city to relieve pressure. It is a blunt instrument wrapped in the ribbon of necessity. The men who own banks and buildings in the Crescent City send word to the men who own plantations downriver. They talk about sacrifice and compensation. They sign promises and promissory notes. The river's level at New Orleans has not yet reached the number that will push the city's walls to failure. The decision is made anyway, because fear can be a policy. On the Greenville levee, Lila squeezes a tin cup in both hands, half surprised the heat can get through. The children sit in her lap as if they are still on a wagon going somewhere. Isaiah's boots leave half moons every place he steps, a mark he will stop seeing when there is too much else to see. A pilot shouts that he can take 20, hands reaching toward his boat's gunwale like stems. Toward light. The pilot counts because counting is safetyten. 12, 15 and then counts again, even as he looks at faces he won't carry. He looks, and then he unknots and gives the flood his back and pushes out into what had been land yesterday, steering between chimneys as if they are buoys. A hog swims by, its back a periscope. A bale of cotton rolls, slows, and sticks to a tree, bursting into white like a sick flower. Somewhere close, a guitar floats. A man wades to it without thinking, and the neck bumps his palm, and he lifts it, and there is water in the body. He will dump it out later, in a camp with kerosene lamps and too many people, and he will tune until the strings forgive him. And 2 weeks after that he will make a song that is cadence and chronicler both, and it will carry the river's low room through time. High water everywhere. The flood has no interest in names. It carries Greenville. It carries Rosedale. It carries Little Perrito. That is a store, a church, and a grammar. It has found a new metaphor for how to move through a country, and it tests it on every acre it can reach. It will ride south, toward Vicksburg, and then toward the silt-flared flat of Louisiana, where the river fans into deltas, and the land's logic is water. Behind it leaves roofs like punctuation and a silence that sounds like wood swelling. Morning shows up the way it does when the world has changed overnight cautious, as if the sun is eavesdropping. A Huron stands on a porch rail a mile from open water and looks down at its feet, startled to find them there. On the levee, the second day begins before the first ends. The river's long back arches and keeps arching. South of Vicksburg, water threads the Yazoo backwater and forces the old cypress to wear necklaces of brownweed. In the city itself, built on bluffs that have been proud of themselves for a century, people look out across the flatness and see an archipelago of rooftops in a sea that wasn't charted. The cannon on the courthouse lawn points at nothing useful. The railroad is a rumor 3 feet deep. Up in Greenville, the camp on the levee grows its own weather. Canvas and bread lines make a wind that has the smell of damp wool and boiled coffee. The rules are posted without being written. Line up, don't argue at the front. Children first for milk. Men away from the boats. The planters and merchants of town form a committee. Because people with ledgers believe in committees the way other people believe in rain. They elect a chairman who wears his authority thin and luminous. He walks with a list in his pocket boats. Flour, lantern. Oil, and under that list, a second list he won't show. Discipline. Control, labor. He is not alone. The Mississippi Delta's great experiment in a racial economy is not suspended by water. It adapts. A black man with river shoulders a bargeman yesterday. A refugee since the water came over the Crown tries to board a boat with his wife and 3 children. A guard steps between the man and the future the boat offers. Back tomorrow, the guard says, and the barrel of the rifle swings without touching. Tomorrow turns into many tomorrows. In the nights that follow, the man's hands are put to levee work again while his family sleeps under canvas, and the water rises until the light on the horizon is a smear, and the land on the horizon is only rumor. Herbert Hoover arrives in a black car that throws mud on its own fenders. He steps out into a town that is itself a shape thrown against the sky and makes a job of being present. He is practical in the way men who make big things move are practical. A tent city here, a railcar depot there, a chain of command drawn in chalk on the side of a warehouse. He talks to reporters because he understands their hunger. He listens, he does. For a day and a half to the story, a black minister tells about the camps on the Greenville levee, that men are being forced to stay and work, that rations are cut if they don't, that the boats leave with white families first, that this is a new edition of an old book. Hoover promises investigation. He recruits Robert Moulton of Tuskegee to chair a colored advisory commission and sends him downriver to gather facts. The facts come back heavy, wet, undeniable. Hoover stacks them neatly on a shelf and keeps walking because his road runs toward November of 1928 and the White House waiting like a dry city on high ground. Dynamite arrives below New Orleans. The place is called Carnarvon, a bend of levee and cane country, 13 miles below the city. Men in hats carry boxes of explosive from boat to bank and bury sticks in clay and tamp clay back over the holes. The city's business class has petitioned, pleaded, threatened until the governor signed a paper that lets engineers commit a civic surgery. Cut the levee here so the river will find an easier thought and spare New Orleans. On April 29th, the fuses lead to a plunger. Photographers climb ladders to see over shoulders. The river leans against wood and earth and patience. A man throws the switch. The explosion is obscenely beautiful water, running forward to eat the new mouth, geysering mud and board and the broken roots of cane. The river, affronted and grateful, seems for a day to nod. In St. Bernard and Plaquemines parishes, the new flood runs in as if it had been waiting for an invitation. Villages that never thought of themselves as sacrifices become them. Families pull boats across their own roads. Men push pirogues over fences that were lines of argument yesterday. The city of Priva keeps its lights a little longer than it might have otherwise. The price is written in salt and silt. The promises of compensation to the people who were drowned on purpose are ink on paper that curls up when the humidity hits. Back in the interior, the flood spreads into Louisiana's ancient bowl. The Ashafaliya Basin breathes in, cypress knees vanish in coffee-colored waves. Trappers notch marks on a tree they have known all their lives and run out of notches by a Tuesday. Morgan City reads the river like a fortune teller reads a palm of line too deep and going deeper. The railroad causeway outside town lifts 3 inches in a day under the buoyancy of the water under it. The U.S. Coast Guard cuts people off their own roofs with axes and jokes, because jokes are tools, too. Cajun fishermen who have never thought of themselves as heroes become that thing as a matter of course. Pirogue drift down a street, a dog stepping delicate as a cat into the bow, a grandmother in her Sunday dress because Sunday is inside her even when the calendar is not. Disease always looks for a path. In the camps, the path is obvious. Too many boaties, not enough soap, a latrine that is a suggestion in wet earth. The Red Cross hangs sheets as nurses white and black move through tents with aprons and hands that know what to do. Babies cough, and men of 60 taste childhood. Again when a spoon of castor oil crosses their lips. Hunger does that. A quarantine flag flutters on a rope. A doctor in muddy boots writes dysentery with a pencil dull enough to tear the paper. At night, the blues talks to itself. Charlie Patton sings in a camp by lamplight. High water everywhere voice. Rough as a levee crown and twice as stubborn. The song is dispatch in scripture. I would go to the hill country, but they got me barred. Beyond, a boy is, and puts the rhythm into the timbers of his bones, and will one day make his own songs about leaving and arrival, and trains that run north. The Great Migration had 1,000 reasons. The water writes a new one, and tapes it to every tent pole. Leave. Leave this field that will dry into powder around your blame again. Leave this credit account you were born into. Leave this promise to pay back what you never borrowed. When the railroad opens again, the cars headed north will carry more than clothes. The water keeps walking. The river slips out of journalism and into geology in slow motion, implacable frames. The Yazoo backwater becomes a lake on a map that did not have a lake. The sunflower turns over in its bed and groans. The Mississippi thinks about its long family argument with the Ashafaliya, shorter way to the Gulf that pulls like a lover. The pull is stronger this spring than for a century. Old river pilots tell each other in low voices that if the river had a mind clear to itself and a day off from human interference, it would jump banks, cut its own new story, send New Orleans into backwater, and make Morgan City the head of a world. The thought is not melodrama. It is an engineering note, pinned to the flood with an oak splinter. On the levee outside Greenville, Lila folds a borrowed blanket into a pillow and tries to turn time into sleep for 2 children who practice rest as if it's a sport they can win. Isaiah sits with his back against a post, eyes open toward the black plain. The stars come out in a small way and then go away behind cloud. A man down the line snores as if he is trying to call something home. A woman sings under her breath and lifts the corner of the song to make a space for breath. The river carries something past them they cannot see. It sounds like a door coming off its hinges. Forever. A Red Cross man with a measuring stick and a pencil tucked behind his ear walks the levee and measures water marked on posts by a boy with a pocket knife. He is not making sense of the flood. He is making a record against forgetting. When the water leaves, the mud will tell its own story ringed on trees, left in the corners of windows like lipstick. The numbers he writes will be the bones of arguments that shift money and law. In New Orleans, the dynamite's echo keeps working. Uptown, the sidewalks are dry enough to dust. Downtown Irish Channel boys play stickball, pretending the river is a dog they taught to sit. Across the bend, in the parishes that took the water the city was told it would take, boats are tied to church steeples. People toss out sodden mattresses and hang rosaries higher on nails. Compensation committees meet in rooms where the trouble is warm and thin coffee. Tastes like outrage. The river in its widest places still wears a white edge where wind picks up the surface and runs with it. The driest part of the line between danger and the rest of the world is exactly as wide as the people standing shoulder to shoulder on it. For now, they are enough. The question that breathes under the canvas and walks the perimeters in boots is simple and very old. What will we be when the water lets us go? The crest is a moving city, and every community on the river's map waits for its visit. In Memphis, the bluffs are crowded with people whose faces all look like the weather. They're out to witness a number turnover. The gauge is a tall, blunt truth teller. It ticks up. 37 feet. 40. 45. A record that makes old men shake their heads because memory has been outbid. streetcars mute along rails just above the wet. The cobblestones at the river's foot are a rumor under brown glass. On a barge moored in the current, men with clipboards write down wind speed they do not care about and watch drift go by that their hands itch to save. The steamboats blow their whistles, a language you can translate if you ever worked a deck. And somewhere out beyond it all, a tree falls into river music and is gone. Below Memphis, the floodplain returns to its inheritance in a single gesture. The sunflower and Yazoo farmlands, the lowlands between Big Name and Bigger Mississippi, and Arkansas One surface. The Milky Way remembers, in the deep night, what it looked like reflected in uninterrupted water before forts and levees and orders at Helena, Hawkins. Refugees crowd the levee paradises around rocking chairs from parlor floors, and also around wooden crates that have only ever been boxers. The Red Cross hands out tickets and then food, because hunger and bureaucracy are twins who travel together. A girl looks at a slice of bread as if it's a postcard from a far country and then eats it in 4 even bites, because finishing fast feels wrong. Foot her down at the mouth of the Yazoo at Vicksburg. The U.S. Army puts the river under a lattice of pilings and braces, a logic that holds for a day and gives up the next. High water pushes the ice factory's doors flat, and a raft made of oil. Drums and tuba sixes goes down. Canal Street like a parade float from a dream where everything is brown and loud. The old courthouse looks out and refuses to help. People who won't leave stack their furniture on bricks, and then on tables, and then on hope. Boats lay their bows into alleys and pull people through windows. A man goes back for a photograph in a metal frame because the face in it is his father, and the father is what he has left of how to be where he is. The boatman says not to, then looks at the man's hands when he comes back and chooses silence. The Lower Basin's the yawning cradle of South Louisiana. Receive the river's great body. Way old furniture receives a sleeping child by sagging and then holding. Ashafelia's timbered interior becomes a sheet of moving dark glass, with cypress and Tupelo rising through it like interrupted sentences. Trappers move camps in a choreography learned from older men, tying houseboats to trees with quick knots. Rafts of palmetto mats stacked like shields on decks. Morgan City, perched on the edge of a future it does not want, dials the railroad north and the Coast Guard south and connects to both. The causeway back to Burrick is a stripe of anxious iron. Water laps at it with intent. The corps of engineers, their cocky crispness, surrendered to mud learns its own lesson in real time. Colonel Jadwin's notebooks are a plan growing teeth. If the river must be bigger than its banks, let it be big on our terms. The outlines that had been cleverness become necessity, somewhere between frantic calls and exhausted breathing. The bones of a national project set. Floodways to be built, so next time the river is invited somewhere of our choosing. Spillways like Bonnet Cara, upstream of New Orleans. A concrete throat that can be opened. Morganza, a line on paper now, a hinge in steel later. Birds point to Madrid up near Cairo, where farmland will one day lie between embankments, designed to take a beating. The river is writing proposals, in muddy italics. Congress will read them with one eye on the next election. On the Greenville levee, the camp culture deepens its grooves. Work lists grow longer. A preacher holds service under a canvas ridge and you can hardly hear the hymn over engines and voices and the weird slap of water against new geometries. The planters argue over tallies and barrels and the length of loans. The way a field of cotton becomes chemistry becomes debt is laid bare by water that does not care about currency. In a tent, a boy ties a string around his wrist and around his little brother's wrist and knots it twice, because the world lately feels like a current, and string seems like a machine that can outthink current. In another tent, an old woman plays with a deck of cards, dealing out patience to a table that is 2 crates pushed together, quoting lines from a sugar box that was once the Bible in her mother's house. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. The rumor of jobs rolls through like a breeze on a close day. Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit, letter smudged and precious move from hand to hand. Cousin Willie says you can rent rooms by the week up there. They say the boss man don't keep no store, you gotta spend it. They say the winter is a kind of meanness, but at least it is honest meanness. A man who made a living making a living for someone else decides, quietly, in a part of the mind that does not hold meetings, that he will go when the train goes. He will go, and he will not be the only one. A map of America is being redrawn in pencil under canvas. Down below Baton Rouge, the river's level toes the top of the levee, and looks the city in the eye. New Orleans elite count their blessings and their ledger sheets. The Carnarvon Cut continues to pour an artificial mouth, gushing its argument into Kane country. The governor's promise of compensation for the people purposely drowned is a jacket that looks good and fits badly. Committees meet in rooms where the air tastes like old cigars and ethics. Minutes are taken. In the parishes that took the water, minutes are not as useful as pumps. In the twilight that ends a day of rescue, a man with a violin plays on the roof of a store in a town whose name a mapmaker never learned. The water licks at the edge of the roof as if the building is a candy. The man's bow finds a hymn his grandmother hummed. The notes walk across the water as if fingers tapping a taut membrane. Men in a flatboat float closer and tie up without asking. The listener's license is renewable by need. The fiddler nods and keeps playing. A heron lifts from a line of fence posts, now a mile apart. Morgan City wakes into a newsreel of its own. The water finds its highest thought in the parish line. The railroad causeway trembles. Men with long poles push at drift, building a dam in the wrong place, stabbing at logs as if fighting a myth. The Corps cuts openings where the water turned. They set dynamite where timbers jammed, and the noise is big enough to teach the townspeople new thoughts about scale. The city holds. The Atchafalaya breathes the river back out through the cypress, a lung exhaling into the Gulf. In Washington, a bill begins its march. The Flood Control Act will be as big as the water, big in money, in authority, in faith placed on men in uniform with slide rules. It will make the Army Corps of Engineers the keeper of a project that stretches from Cairo to the Gulf levees, rebuilt and raised, spillways carved into farmland bought with checks and promises, backwater areas mapped and named. Its subtext is memory codified. Never again by accident. If we can do it on purpose, no camera can hold all of it. Photographers gather on bluffs, on boats, on roofs. Glass plates get spotty with rain. Film strips dry on lines in hotel rooms occupied by men who smell of river and developer. In a photograph that will run on the front page in a city 1,000 miles away, a rowboat slips down a street whose name is an inside joke in a town not laughing. In another, a woman's hands rest on a child's shoulders with a gentleness that makes the flood back away for a second. The crest moves on, it always does. But everywhere it passes, it leaves behind a new vocabulary that will be used for years to explain choices, and to excuse them, and to demand others. The people under canvas, the people on roofs, the people with clipboards, the people counting rivets and the people who will count votes. They all stand in the last light of a spring day and feel the air shift. The water is still up. The day after up is a country nobody has walked yet. The recession of a flood is not a romance. It is a mess that evaporates too slowly. When the water goes, it does not go cleanly. It drops things. It carries where it grows bored of carrying them. In the delta, the river lays down a film of mud thin as a lie in some places and feet deep in others, fine silt that dries into concrete unless you cut it. Cakes that break under shovels and release a smell like a wet barn married to a dead swamp. Men and women step back into houses that saved them and find floors curled up like old bread. Photographs dry with new maps of the flood etched into them rings. Rivulets, a chronology of ruin in watermarks. At the foot of every stair someone says, "Thank God," and then the work begins. Lime is scattered. Walls are cut up to the high water line in an act of faith that timber can be convinced to forget. Pianos are lifted, and their legs collapse, and they are lowered again and left like whales beached by an absent tide. The Red Cross hands out disinfectant and flour in tasks. Hoover drives the river a endless camera. Now, more clipboards and points to where tents should be folded and schoolhouses erected with their doors open to children who have been educated by water. The tallies write themselves. 27,000 square miles underwater, from Cairo to the Gulf, an erasure so large it can be seen from heaven if you stand on a steamboat and imagine well. Death tolls are written soft at first, then firm. A few hundred. Perhaps more. The river takes bodies the way it takes fence posts, and does not itemize. The truth that travels faster than numbers. More than 500,000 displaced. In that number most are black tenants and sharecroppers, whose names never reached beyond planter ledgers. The ledger lines now go north. In the months that follow, trains carry families to Chicago and Detroit and St. Louis, and the neighborhoods those cities become are touched on their corners by the muddy hands of the Delta. The blues take a new avenue. Churches gather in brick and ice, not clapboard and heat. Votes cross party lines. In a generation. In Greenville, the complaints that were whispers under canvas are testimony now. Robert Moton's commission reports to Hoover. Botched rations, forced labor, discrimination, violent and casual both. Hoover meets Moton, and, with the measured tone of a man who keeps time with elections, he promises what can be promised without changing the river's grammar. Investigations, reforms, gratitude. He does what political men do, files the words where they will serve him later. In 1928, the black vote still travels often with the party of Lincoln, and Hoover will catch a great deal of it. In the decade that follows, T Memory of 27 will whisper under ballots cast another way. A slow change in the map, written in black ink and sweat. Congress passes the Flood Control Act of 1928. It puts its hand on the Mississippi and calls the contact a handshake. The Mississippi River and Tributaries Project becomes a national spine. Levees built higher and broader. Spillways carved, including Bonnet Cara. A concrete mouth to be opened when the city downstream forgets how to breathe. The Birds Point New Madrid floodway, carved into 130,000 acres of Missouri bottomland, as a deliberate sacrifice in years to come. Morganza's gates conceived to swing wide and spare Baton Rouge and New Orleans by sending water across the Atchafalaya backwater levees and pumps, ordered for basins previously left to decide for themselves. Over the next decades, Old River Control is built to fix an argument between the Mississippi and the Atchafalaya giant concrete orders, to keep the main river where commerce wants it, to prevent the faster road to the Gulf from becoming the road the river takes. This is new engineering. Born not of vanity but of the memory of water in people's lungs. In the parishes below New Orleans, the compensation promised for the dynamited levee at Carnarvon Dribbles arrives late, arrives short, arrives to one pocket and not another. Families rebuild and tether their lives to reminders that the river's mercy is as local as it is grand. In New Orleans, a generation grows up with the Bonnet Cara spillway as a field trip, a concrete plain, usually dry, occasionally open to become a spring river inside the river. Fish flapping across grass like sudden migrants when gates are dropped. The city's memory of 1927 lives under an accent and a song and a caution whispered down alleyways when the river gets high. That time they blew the levee. Up in the delta, Isaiah and Lila stand on what's left of a porch that needs a name again. They lift boards that can be saved because saving boards is a way to prove that saving is possible. Their children race to the end of the yard and find a ditch that used to be a ditch. Now a new channel, the size of a man's back. The mule's hip bones show a history of weeks without enough green. The field that gave them cotton is a thin shine of silt that promises more than soil, usually has the decency to promise. Isaiah digs his heel in and feels the ground forgive a little. A letter arrives by the 2 days week train. Its edges soft from water it did not touch. A cousin in Chicago who says come. A welding job at the stockyards that didn't exist when cotton was king in a boy's head. A bedroom in a building with 3 other families and a parlor that smells like cabbage and opportunity. The decision, when it is made, feels less like a leaving than like stepping to the side of a moving thing. Lila packs a quilt with pieces of dresses that knew hot mornings. Isaiah wraps the guitar in a flour sack and ties it with string because strings have been good to him. They board a train that smells like coal and iron and new air and watch trees thinner than cypress rolled by like fence pickets. The delta behind them still shining in the low places. Years pass in a town like Greenville, like water under pilings. The levee grows wider and higher, its crown grated by machines with honest teeth. The tent city exists only in a photograph on a library wall, and in jokes told by men who were boys' jokes with hard edges and long shadows. The relief committee is minutes in a folder. The Red Cross cartons are gone. New school chalk scrapes across new slates in rooms that smell of oiled wood. Some houses are taller now rebuilt on piers. Others are gone. Grass over the rectangle that used to be a story. The river goes on knowing only what it has always known. Gravity, Gredia, what ice and rain decide far away. The MR&T project works, and then doesn't, and then works again because no plan is one thing across 1,000 miles. The spillways open in future springs and pressures are relieved and headlines say saved. And the pictures of gates half raised are handsome like bridges. The floodways are cut in winter's quiet and used in springs that go loud. Birds nest in them when nobody needs their sacrifice. Old River Control hums with the sound of American certainty. as the Mississippi and the Atchafalaya share water by allotment, like neighbors. Compelled to split a well, what 1927 did is inscribed less in concrete and more in hands. It rewrote the map you cannot print. A migration made at the speed of human need, roads that became one way in a single season, a politics that tilted in a storm's wake, blues record shellac that carries the exact timbre of a man singing on a levee under a lampar shipped. Northland played on machines with crank handles and rooms seated by radiators, in parlor after parlor, in club after club, in factory boarding houses and tenement kitchens. The river's low note finds people who have never stepped in it. It changes a backbeat. It changes a vote. It changes dinner. We tell the story of the Great Mississippi. Flood of 1927 in acres drowned and lives lost because numbers nobly reach for what they cannot hold. Latertosai et tota cantinon. The difference between control and management and how the words we use to talk about water are also the words we use to talk about ourselves. Bethertosai. It was a lesson that began with a crack in the levee at Mounds Landing and is still being graded every spring. Better to say, America's map is not its borders, but the way its people move when they are asked to choose between staying and reaching for a dry place. On a summer day, years later, a family stops at a spillway grass grona, between concrete bays, kids running the length of a structure that could turn into a river by the pull of a lever. A plaque tells the story in small brass letters. Flood of 1927. Flood Control Act of 1928. Mississippi River and Tributaries Project. The kids don't read. They run. A man looks out toward the big river and thinks about water that does not care. Men who thought it did. And what it means to live downstream of a genius that never sleeps. He doesn't pray. He listens. The river has a low speech that does not stop. It says what it's said since, before people put their first house on its bank. I am going where I am going. Make your plans. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that changed the world.